Hi, I'm Shane Schick for CIO Canada, and one of the biggest issues and questions that faces this community is whether Chief Information Officers can make the transition from IT leaders to strategic business leaders. Recently, at the CIO Association of Canada's annual peer forum in Toronto, they gathered a group of people from the education, finance, and other sectors to look at what approaches have worked best and which to avoid.
She has 25 years of experience in the technology industry, from a programmer, analyst, through manager, senior leader, etc. Her passion today lies in the fusion of technology within the continuum of learning at the Bishop Strawn School. A firm advocate of the holistic leadership in CIO role plays in any organization, and Marianne recognizes building innovative capacity as a challenge and currently leads the BSS effort in the formal IT shared services initiative with other independent schools. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Marianne Ballantyne.
Thank you very much, Craig. Can everyone hear? We didn't do a sound test. It's good? All right, thank you. I'd like to just start by introducing our panel over here. I'll start with Carol Briard. Carol is CIO of Bank of Canada. Her department has led a large-scale renewal of the central bank's technological infrastructure. She serves on the bank's Corporate Management Committee, overseeing corporate operations and policy, on management forum concerned with information sharing and management initiatives. And she chairs the IT Review Committee, delineating the motivation, consequences, risks, and trade-offs involved in strategic IT decisions. Welcome, Carol. Thank you. And to the left of Carol, we have Samantha Licio. Samantha is CIO, who provides information and information technology leadership to the Ministries of Finance, Revenue, Energy and Infrastructure, and Cabinet Office, and advice and counsel for ministry executives with respect to business directions and priorities in IT. During her tenure, Samantha has delivered key initiatives, including Ontario Newsroom, Infrastructure Stimulus Tracking Portal, Ontario Taxes Online, and it's that time of year, and Corporate Tax Administration. And to the left of Samantha, we have Laura Williams. With over 150,000 students and 13,000 employees, Peel District School Board is Canada's second largest school board, spanning Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon here in Ontario. Laura Williams has held several senior IT positions, including with organizations including National Director of IT at PricewaterhouseCoopers, National Director of IT at Oracle Canada, and IT Director for both the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities, Government of Ontario. So welcome, Laura. And last but not least, we have Susan Donis over the far left, who had the question earlier. Susan is with Procter & Gamble. She is CIO and Shared Services Canada Division, and she leads the Canada strategy end-to-end on information technology and shared services, reporting directly to the CEO of P&G Canada. She's part of the core leadership team in leading the P&G Canadian business, which totals over $3 billion in annual sales. Additionally, Susan is responsible to the global P&G CEO and CIO for a business transformation initiative on driving faster and better decision-making at P&G across all functions and all business units for 140,000 P&G employees in over 80 countries. And I also happen to know that Susan has lived in almost all of the countries within South America. Is that right? Yeah. Great. So, the topic of our panel is what does it mean for CIOs to be strategic business leaders? And we've heard just with the session before, Kathy Koop and Ron Babin did an amazing session giving us some great research on what makes a CIO successful today and what do we need to be thinking about if we're tracking towards the CEO. So we'd like to shift gears and move from the research and the information that we've just heard to some firsthand practical experience and voice in the field today. So I'd just like to start by asking Carol, who has an incredible experience, what your own experience is with the role of CIO today. What does that role look like?
I think as you all aware, but more than 10 years ago, the role has changed a lot. We saw a lot of changes among and creating some sort of a voice of a CIO. If I look at my agenda and the work I do, I spend less than about 50% of my time of managing IT business. What I do is that as being a business leader and a member of the corporate management committee of the bank, I spend an awful lot of time managing business issues. My colleagues do expect me now to have a foot in the business and a foot in IT, to understand and grasp very quickly their business issue, and to be able to come out with innovations, ideas, and changes at the best possible cost. We all know that. I think also what they expect us is to take as less as possible of their time to understand their business. So you may know what the Bank of Canada is all about. I'm not going to tell you that we are very unique in Canada. There's no comparison. We have very different environment, very different type of clients internally. We go from a rank which is the typical corporate admin group of individuals. We have, of course, the currency, which because we print banknotes, which everybody likes to know about. No, I don't have a huge number of banknotes in my purse today, sorry. And we have also the very important critical banking system, which you know that the banking system of Canada smoothly closes every night. And it's mostly due to the hard work of the people in the background with the large value transaction system who make sure that everything goes smoothly. And you have also one of the most important value for the Canadian, which is the monetary policy environment and the analytic environment of the bank. And this is where these are the most important clients, which are the economists, which are trying to make sure that the Canadian economy will meet their target inflation factor. And this is where it is most critical to fully understand their needs. It's a huge number of people who have, in fact, a very number of master degree and PhD degree, but they're not very good always at technology. They think they understand what technology is all about, and the challenge I had was to make sure that I could grasp their environment better and to be able to propose them changes, align them, and making sure that we present the value, the process innovation, and the streamlining. IT governance is very important, making sure they all understand about the trade-offs, the choices that they make, getting them involved because they not always wanted to be involved. They wanted to ask IT, they wanted IT to deliver at no cost. Cost was not really an issue many years ago. Now cost is very important, everybody needs to be conscious of that. So that's a bit of way on my agenda on this. I think the most important thing that we've learned in the past, which is a total improvement about the way we see the CIO role today, is that we learn how to keep the lights on. If everything is smooth and running, then you can go to the additional level and then work with your business partners within your own organization.
Thank you, Carol. Anything that you'd like to add, ladies, to sort of what you see the role in your own experiences of CIO today, in light of what we've heard and in light of your own experiences?
I think I would echo that, and you know, it's not a secret, the role of the CIO is changing. And I think absolutely there's an expectation, whether you're in public sector or private sector, that you have that deeper knowledge of, and we can use the term loosely, business for those of us in public sector.
And I think to echo Carol's comment about being excellent at the operations of IT, to enable that, that seat at the table with business, those more strategic discussions, you absolutely have to get out of the, is email up today, or how's the network performance doing last month? You got to elevate the conversation beyond that, and the only way you can do that, I think, is by demonstrating that operational excellence on the fundamentals. We don't get a seat at the table until we can do that. So there's a fundamental competency issue that needs to be addressed first.
And maybe I can just add to that a bit, is we talked about succession planning, and maybe that doesn't make you feel really excited and passionate. You know, I'm going to build a successor so they don't need me. But I look at it differently, as if I need those competencies, then my successor needs those competencies. And I'm very fortunate to have people who are either excellent or becoming excellent at operations. And that actually, not only are they my successors, but it actually frees me up to have other conversations. So did I leave someone in charge for the next 2 days? Absolutely. Am I quite comfortable with them at the executive table? Absolutely. And it's not just about building a successor. It's about building in something that gives you back that time to have important conversations.
So we've talked a little bit about the CIO today, but what do you think, looking back in your years of experience, what do you think has driven the change to the role that it is today? What has driven some of those changes? What have you experienced in your own careers and progression?
Well, I mean, I guess what I could say is that it's evolved from, I remember when I first had my first discussion with the general manager of Canada, and I was starting, and he said, I don't really understand IT, it's just a black box, and I just need that box to work. And that was kind of the discussion we had, kind of to your point around, it was in such sad state that, we couldn't ship product, we couldn't pay our employees, things like that, which was, really in dire straits. So of course, he didn't want to understand, he just wanted it to work. Now, kind of fast forward many years, and the kind of conversations that we're leading is, how can we simplify the way P&G works? And I'm responsible for that. And I think the change in that is because as IT, information is a really critical element of how everything flows through the system. And we're one of the unique people who see that. Because we can see the way everything goes together. Everybody has kind of their functional silos. And I often, when I talk to people about IT and why it's an exciting career, I say, well, you could actually have a career in every single function while still remaining some kind of competency. Because when you think about it, if you're supporting marketing, you have to understand marketing as well as marketing does. When you're supporting product supply, the same thing in finance, et cetera, et cetera. So we're the only ones who kind of see across this. So as an example, I was also asked to lead about the decision-making because we were the only ones who saw how the decisions flowed through the system and how that impacted many pieces. And another example is we now have a new CEO, and he feels really passionate about how do we digitize P&G. So how do we move from the slow decision-making to something more that's more virtual, where information plays an even bigger and more strategic role. And again, I was actually asked to lead that globally because we're the only ones who see this across the board again. And I'm sure that I probably echo a lot of experiences that you have, that we're starting to be seen as people who understand across the silos, can understand how things can function across them. Also, there's no other function that has gone through so much change in the last 20 years than IT has. So in fact, we're experts at change management. And when you think of the way the world is working and how volatile and how uncertain it is, change and having that as a key competency is a really critical factor. So, I think the good news for us in IT is we have all the skills, and we've actually had a lot of time to experiment on those skills, at least more time than the other functions have had to adapt to change. When I talk to marketing, how much has marketing changed in, 100 years? Not that much, really, when you think about it. Same with finance. So at the end of the day, we've had to constantly evolve ourselves, and I think that has made us very relevant. And I think those are the kinds of skill sets that we bring to the table.
If I could add to this, one of the important, if we go back to the speaker we had before, because we have that broad view, then if we want to pass the right messages, this is very important to have the right interpersonal skills, how to communicate. Because the people who have a silo view, if you go to them and talk about the linkage or the past over they have to be very careful in how you present that to them. What's in it for them is very important. So this is where the interpersonal skills, the communication skills comes to be very, very important. It's not always knowing, it's how to tell the story, if I go back to what they said earlier. How you tell the story for them to be happy. And you know what, if at the end they believe they got the idea before us, that's fine as long as the company and the organization goes along.
Yeah, often I think it's more about the psychology than the technology, because what you really want people to do is to adapt and use things, and that's how you're successful. So I mean, the technology is important, but it's fundamental versus sufficient in all of this.
And maybe if I could just add to that as well, I think the role of technology itself, per se, has changed over time. 20 years seems to be kind of a, the marker in terms of how long the role of CIO has been around. And when you think of when it first started, it was all about automating finance. It was about automating payroll. And I think what you're hearing is, it's not about automation anymore, it's about innovation. And in fact, for those of you who participated in the e-seminar, Tom Vassos presented on some models that, with the notion that innovation isn't something that happens an aha moment. There's actually a process, and you can structure a process to actually derive innovation. And so that was kind of something we had to kind of play with to say, oh, we need to be intentional around innovation. And to your point earlier, we also have to explain innovation in the language of the business. And one thing I did, I spent 20 years outside the education sector, found myself in the education sector, and they were talking a different language. And I actually went to an education conference. It's kind of like French immersion. I went for 3 days, and I wrote down words I didn't understand, wrote down phrases that got repeated often, and essentially tried to learn some of the language. And so it's not enough to innovate. I think you actually have to figure out this language the business is speaking.
And I think our cross-functional view gives us an opportunity to see some broader horizontal opportunities that within each of those functional business areas aren't apparent. So it enables IT to be coming to the business with some creative suggestions around how those opportunities could be used and exploited. And I don't know that any of the business leaders who are compensated within their verticals necessarily get to look sideways very often. And I think that's a key area where IT needs to be thinking about what are those cross-horizontal opportunities, because we have a unique perspective to be able to see some of those.
So I'm just going to switch gears a little bit. The study speaks quite a bit about personal attributes and competencies, and two of the ones that they mentioned were building relationships and change management. Now, I don't know if anybody here in the audience has noticed, but we're all women at this panel. And so I'm going to ask a sort of a gender-oriented question. A couple of weeks ago, we had a Women in IT session. It was a Ontario chapter session. It was just excellent. And there was a lot of discussion around women being particularly good at building relationships and change management. So I wonder if I could just toss that over here and hear a little bit more about what your thoughts are on that. Is that true? Do you disagree?
There was actually there was a study that came out a couple years ago, and I'd have to go find it back, but it was in the Harvard Business Review, and it was conducted by Harvard. And what they had done is they had analyzed both women's and men's responses to a bunch of criteria, very similar to what we saw from Kathy and Ron. And I think there were about 12 factors. And out of 11 of those 12 factors, both the women scored themselves higher and the men scored the women higher in all of those except for one. Unfortunately, that one, where the women and the men scored the women lower, was in strategy. So that's really a key element that we've been talking a lot about. And so there was a lot of discussion in the article as to why that was. Was it a perception? Was it in terms of, this, trying to make sure it's somebody else's idea, this kind of relationship building, et cetera. But it was very interesting to find that some of these key attributes, when you think of some of the natural things that come to women a little bit more naturally, it's the nurturing, et cetera. It's not to say that men don't do that as well. It's just, some of the strengths there that come in. So I do think, although there's no stereotypes, obviously there's women who are better at men in some things and men that are better at some women in some things. There are some things that come more naturally. And I just think it's interesting that a wide variety of those women tend to have some strengths in.
I think on building a relationship, yes. I think in general, we have an affinity and an ability to do that. What I think far is more important is our ability and recognition that in order to succeed, you need to have a team. And a team who is built on the competency of everybody within a team. If we go back at women, as women, we were not born, I should say, and trained in over the past, let's say, not by revealing my age, but I have over 25 years of experience. So I wasn't born to get into competition. Men, typically, when they were young, they were trained to go into competition. So probably the affinity we have as a woman is that it was a need to work closely with people. We like to build a good team. And we don't especially need to go out and say, I did it. We understand a lot the we aspect of things, which is important. Probably because we have our spouse, children, and all this also. We are the most sometimes, and men, don't be angry with me, but we are sometimes the most responsible person that it cares of the family things, and we're always worried about the kid, the dog, the husband, and the children. I think it's changing with the new generation, but at the age I am, that was still the case. So I think it's a fundamental combination of all of that.
Maybe just to expand a bit, I think building relationships is a learned skill, and you can maybe at drinks tonight talk about whether you think women learn it earlier. But there's some great work in the education space by Garmston and Wellman, and they dissect how to build relationships. And it's not the, what was the book around how to win friends and influence? It's not that. And it talks very intentionally as a leader about structures that build good discussion, good dialogue, which is very helpful as a leader because you want to build relationships and you want to teach your staff how to build relationships. And it's excellent work, and there's a whole toolkit of things in there. But the premise is that building relationships is a skill. Again, it's a structure, and you can be very intentional about learning the tools and working with people even if you don't like the people. And he talks about the need to suppose good intentions even if you have to hallucinate them. And based on that, you then can go forward and be constructive.
I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate, recognizing that most of the people in the room are not female. I think some of the other skills that were talked about this morning were that innate business knowledge. And it's interesting to me that even with a recognition that women have maybe more of those nurturing skills, they're still only 2 or 4% of the C-suite and most of the Fortune 500 corporate companies. So there's still something fundamental that's lacking in the application of that skill set at the board table. And I think that we need to be mindful of that when we move forward too.
So we've talked a little bit about the gender. This could be gender or non-gender sort of question, but I wondered if we could shift it a little bit to, we've talked about successes and what you think the role is today and what works, but what about the challenges? What are the challenges that you as women or you as CIOs in your roles have faced in being successful in your role? And if you do have aspirations for a CEO, what are the challenges that you see in front of you?
If you look at the mandate of the Bank of Canada, if you know who is the equivalent of the CEO, is the governor of the Bank of Canada. In this case, I think that I will not have any aspiration with an IT background because that needs to be an economist who runs that. I think that if you look at the challenges, and to be honest, personally, I never felt any major difficulty or impediment or roadblock because I was a woman. I think probably very instinctively, I understand very early in order to learn about the business, I needed to go where the people were, and in probably 60–70% of the cases, they were men. And I needed to find a way to find the place without really understanding at that point that relationship was important, and to be able to understand their challenges and to work with them to establish that good relationship. The challenges we're facing today are a bit different. It's not as a CIO, I believe. We are the head, and we need to be fully aware. Is that technology has been changing so much. We have automated everything. I think we've done that. So the next level is a far more complicated challenge to handle in every organization. It's related at how do we analyze data better? How do we understand better our clients? How do we understand this in order to be able to strive additional innovation, products, situation? And then the other things we have is that, did we streamline enough the processes? Did we fill the gap between the different functions and to have that global view? And this needs to have the ability to influence better your colleagues at the top, that they will understand, that they have that necessity in order to go over and beyond. I think what we face as a financial crisis was an opportunity for the CIOs, because they were looking to how do I streamline my activity without putting a major roadblock when the economy is going to shift again. Because our Canadian economy was very different than the States and other countries. So they had to slow down a bit, but not too much. So the layoff was not the key success of it. So I think we had a great opportunity to provide to them solution in order to that. And this is, I believe, the challenge we are all facing towards the future.
To expand on what Samantha was talking, I do think, and I don't think it's a gender issue, I think one of our barriers or challenges is really understanding the business. And the reality is, there's so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
And so we need to be excellent in our, as someone asked me once, you know, is CIO a business leader, an IT leader? I said, yes, both, really. And so that's the challenge. I need to be excellent and always be honing my knowledge in terms of IT opportunities, and I need to understand the business. And you really can't be at the same level as your business colleagues because they spend 100% of their time understanding their business. And so I think one of the things that's going to become even more critical is networking, is knowing who to call on in your colleagues that has expertise that can give you the 10-minute overview of virtualization. What is this and why is it relevant to my organization? Because you don't have time. And so I don't know about you, but in university we had study groups. And someone had to read this book and someone had to study this, and we'd come to the table and we had half an hour to understand a topic. And so I think one of the key things there is really being very intentional about your networking and supporting one another and understanding who's expert in this room on virtualization, so you can call upon them, or collaboration. And so I think understanding the business is a barrier, but part of the solution is how do you free up time to practically do that.
And forums like this are tremendously important and valuable for me from that perspective too.
Yeah, I think for me there's two things. One is one of the comments that Samantha made around kind of the basics, and I think Peter also made it too, which is for some reason IT has this bad rap of not being able to meet projects on time, on cost, on budget, et cetera. And as you all know, that we live in such a changing world that it's not as simple as a sales forecast, like why didn't you meet the sales forecast, et cetera. So what I find is this reputation still has repercussions in our leadership. And what I find is, even though you individually might do a good job, it feels like we have to gain it one person at a time. Versus if you think about a brand, it's not like every single brand, you know, you have to do that one brand, one person at a time. I mean, there is some kind of a brand and marketing and an equity. Like when you think of Toyota and all the issues that they've had, you know, they have a huge effort to try to change that mindset. And I really think we're missing that in IT, is I still think that people can't get beyond that because it feels like you're not meeting expectations. Meeting expectations mean in your field, do you have everything in your shop functioning, you know, not perfectly, but, you know, smoothly? And for some reason, IT still has that reputation. And I think the other thing is far too often we're being seen as enablers versus leaders. And so for me, an enabler is somebody who helps drive down the cost, the SR&A, et cetera. Whereas we need to be seen as the leaders of one of the business strategies. How are we increasing sales? How are we increasing our profit and leading that strategy versus being an enabler to it. So I think those are two key things that we somehow need to get over. And as I said, I think individually everybody in this room is doing that, but for some reason there's not a collective equity around that across the board.
I like that. Enabler to me sounds like, you know, somebody that supports an addiction. I think that's a great way to describe it. But as competent as an individual might be in some of the attributes that were talked about earlier, we've got to be bringing all of our IT staff along there, and I think there's a big challenge with the way our staff talk to the business. And we have porous organizations that have lots of relationships at lots of different levels. We've got to be building that fundamental understanding what you're doing in IT in terms of the business outcomes, not IT for IT's sake. And even when folks are talking about successes that they've had, major project implementations, the language is always about the implementation, not in terms of the business outcomes. So it's always pushing back to staff to stress the business outcomes of the work they're doing, rather than being an enabler that's just pushing technology.
And I think that's closely tied to motivation. Now, I'm very fortunate to work in public sector, and I don't need to create great moral purpose in education. It is a great thing to spend your time on. And one of the things we do is we actually look at what are our objectives, and we actually go through an exercise where we map backwards. And we always say everybody should have what we call the line of sight. What am I doing to help students graduate? And everybody down to, we have people who work, you know, deep in our financial systems, HR. Everybody needs that line of sight. What am I doing to make sure students graduate? And it's a great, if you've never done that exercise, and in private sector it might be, what am I doing to drive, you know, profit, or what am I doing to drive sales? But it's a great exercise, it's a great motivator. But what was interesting when we did this exercise in our organization is they learned the language. They were able to kind of articulate what they were doing and how it relates to the people in our organization.
Just like to pick up on a comment. I'm not sure how many people have heard of this terminology, but we call it at cause versus at effect, which is this whole concept of sometimes we tend to be at cause versus at this effect, which is, okay, well, that's not my problem, it's the business. It's like, no, you're the project manager. You need to make sure, you have to hold yourself accountable, whether you lead it or not, or whether you have influence on it. You're the person who's been put on point to lead this. And I think sometimes folks in our organization feel like they're cornered into this one technology piece that they own, and they don't own the business. That's X person, versus there's nobody else there, so it's you. You've got to do this. And I do agree, it's beyond just folks in this room. It's our whole talent pool.
Okay, well, we've heard some very interesting challenges there. I was particularly struck by a few things. One is understanding the business and having, and that takes a lot of time, and having the time to do that. And how do you do that? Well, there's succession planning and networking and finding the people to help you with that very quickly. So I'd like to segue by way of wrap up is with all of you to just take a couple of minutes to just tell us what you think are a couple of nuggets that we can take, the audience can take away in terms of your best advice and from your own experiences, what really works. We've heard the research. We've had a great conversation around a number of things, including some good advice. But if you could wrap it up into just a couple of nuggets around what you think are the two key things that people should take away.
I think what we discussed earlier throughout the survey is that you need a mentor. And throughout my career, I had a mentor, and I purposely decided to have a mentor within the business, because I changed within my own organizations, because I changed a lot, and it was different field of expertise. And so it's someone that you can go to, and you're not afraid of being judged if you ask any question, because that person will help you understand. And he or she will take time because they feel that in return, he or she will get better. Understanding the business quickly, taking time, and not being afraid of ask what I call sometimes my little stupid questions, because And then sometimes they will look at you and they would say, my God, this is very good. I didn't think about that. So I think that would be my key things very quickly if I should say as an advice.
Mine would be a little bit different. There's an old journalism saying, don't bury the lead. I think when IT is in front of the business, you've got a very short time to be able to demonstrate that you understand things. So whether that's an issue that you're explaining or whether that's an opportunity, you've got to be really succinct about getting that elevator pitch done. I'll use an example from the past. We had a major email system issue about 1.5 years ago that brought the whole system down. Fairly complicated problem that involved all kinds of load balancing and server tuning in the background to fix. Explaining that to the business was as simple as saying, a minister's office staffer sent his wedding video over the email and it crashed. Don't do that. That simple conversation enacted the behavioral change that meant we didn't have to go through that complex technological problem solving again and again. So it's being able to figure out from a business perspective what is the issue or what is the opportunity, and to get that across in really simple terms.
I think, and we've talked a lot about understanding the business, I encourage you to and I use the example, I went to an education conference. What a great opportunity. I encourage you to do things like that. Someone once wisely said to me, whatever your CEO is reading, read it. So find out what your CEO is reading and read it, because that's part of building a common language. And understanding the business, you need to go to their conferences and you need to read what they're reading. And so really encourage you to understand the business.
Yeah. I mean, I would totally agree with everything everybody said. Just putting a different spin on some things is I would say you and perhaps the general manager or the CEO, and I would argue you are better at this than the general manager, are the only one in the management team who can connect the dots to solve, as Roger Martin would say, the wicked problems. You are the only one who can lead that, because the wicked problems go across all the different functions. And I would argue you know a greater level of detail and you know where the skeletons are buried more than the general manager or the CEO knows. So take that responsibility and lead it, because you are more than qualified to do it.
Great. Well, this is, thank you very much, ladies, an opportunity to open it up for questions. Are there any, or comments on what you've heard? We're very interested in hearing your experiences as well. Challenges, things that have worked for you. No questions? Perfect presentation then. I do have one more question. All of this, oh, sorry. Oh, great. Mike.
My name is Mark Weaver, and I'm with the London District Catholic School Board, so I'm also in the education sector. One of the big challenges that we have in our organization is trying to define this line between what is an IT function and what is an end user function. And I think it was Carol who mentioned the issue of data analysis. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are there, where you think the balance of the responsibility should lie for the analysis of data. Is it the IT department because they have access to lots of important data, or really is it the end user who needs to acquire those abilities to do that? So I'm curious to know your thoughts.
I think if you look at the mandate of the Bank of Canada, it is very difficult for my people to fully understand and provide support to economists which have PhDs and master degrees who are browsing data, which usually are not very patient with this. In the past, before I joined, they was trying to have a pocket of people within IT that were providing service to the economist. We were not very successful. It wasn't working well. So I switched back to the model where there are some business support organization within the business, which in fact they are some sort of a research assistant that can help the economists by browsing the data, not only on the technical aspects, because in some way they're better than us in playing with these tools, but it's how to tweak the things to get the proper attributes and the proper data. So consciously, because of the nature of the skills and within the bank, we've decided to do this as a team. If I would have been in maybe other organization, maybe I would have changed the model. So everything I did was thinking, who are the people who will have the knowledge and the understanding and be able to speak and understand quickly the nature of the problem. And that's why I choose to go to the business. On the other hand, it makes them fully accountable now. They have to deliver, and they will stop saying IT is not delivering. Because they are my partner now to deliver to their end clients, which are the economists. So they need to work with us, we need to work with them. That's a perfect team.
I can talk a little bit about how we've addressed it in our organization. I think it's an excellent question. I think we too have tried to essentially align two groups. Yeah. So within my organization, there's a small group called Information Management. And when I get challenged on, why are we spending that kind of money on that group? I say, oh, they're executive reporting. They go, yeah, I think I want to buy that. So, but we also have a research group. And, so you need that business component, the people who have PhDs and understand, but I've married it with an information management team, because if you're analyzing the wrong data, it's not helpful to anyone. So we have an information management team that works with research, and it's really co-owned, and we rely on these teams to work very closely together. The lines are very blurry.
Question?
Hi, I'm Carlos from the province of Ontario. We're talking about senior folks, we're talking about gender. I'd like to talk about the next generation coming up in IT, which is the X and Y generation, which is radically different in needs. What are your organizations doing to attract these folks into the IT role? And what do you think of mentorship of these folks also? I don't think we're identifying that well, and I think that within 3-4 years is a huge problem with resources, IT resources. And I think it's becoming it's not just an HR issue, it's an IT issue. I don't think there's enough people graduating with the skills. What are we doing to address that?
Okay, so there's a couple of different things. We could talk this the whole day. In fact, is there a lunch table on this? Because we should create one. There is. Okay, we'll go there and we'll talk. A number of different things. One is just in terms of there's a huge talent shortage. So in IT, with the IT skill sets, and I'm not talking programmers here necessarily. So there's work being done by a Canadian coalition, of which CIO Association partners with them to drive, what does the next kind of schooling need to look like? And there's several things in process, and Andrew can speak to this much more eloquently than I can here, but certainly they're doing some things to change the way the education system and what we're teaching in the schools. So that's one, and perhaps Andrew can talk about that a little bit. Tomorrow? You're talking about it tomorrow, okay. The other is in terms of Generation X and Generation Y. And I would say, firstly, what we know about the generations is that, they want to be autonomous. They want to be motivated to a greater cause. There's lots of things. They're far more tech savvy. They want more flexibility, et cetera. And I would say that this is very inclusive because, when you look at our different generations, people want that too. I mean, there's a recent book called Drive. That was written, which is the largest motivating factor for people is actually beyond a certain amount is not salary. It's actually this motivation is about feeling like you're moving the penny forward each day, feeling that you're independent and then you have some ability to move things on your own, that you have some flexibility, et cetera. And in fact, this is true of all the generations. It's just the X and the Y are kind of bringing this, very foremost and front center. Purpose is also very important that we've heard in terms of the generation X and Y. But this book, Drive, has a ton of research on it, which is basically motivation to feel like we're doing something for a greater good is what motivates all of us, not just the X and the Y. So what I would say is what's good for them is good for all of us. And in terms of all of this, I would also say that in a sense, IT is a little bit more advanced because we tend to be a lot more adaptable to change, so willing to try new things, which means trying these virtual work environments. It tends to be IT that is far ahead of the business on this. The other things in terms of allowing flexibility and adaptability and people to direct their own work. I think that's something that in all businesses we need to kind of figure out what we do there, because this command and control structure doesn't work for them and it doesn't work for us either. So there's definitely some things at play there.
Maybe I can add to that. I always say my students will be your employees. First of all, I can say they're very creative, they're very tech savvy, but I would say young women are choosing not to go into IT very early. Come grade 7 or 8, they have already made the choices that preclude them from careers in IT. And I think there is a gap coming in terms of skills shortage. We don't, I'll tell you, we don't see, in Peel we have a lot of new Canadians. Anyone's welcome to come visit my board. We look like what Canada will look like 10 years from now. And so we're not seeing it based on certainly new Canadians and long-standing Canadians, but we are seeing a huge gender gap in terms of who goes into, and not just computer science, but all of the technical areas. And we're seeing that in high school, and you're going to see that in colleges, universities. I think there's representation here, but you have 50% of the population, the majority of which are choosing not to go into computer science come college and university. And it'll be a while, I guess, before we feel the full impact of that. But I can affirm that that's happening at a very early stage.
We had a really good discussion about that at the Women in IT session a couple of weeks ago. And I think the consensus at the table there was IT does a really lousy job of marketing what we do in terms of the change and the impact that has, whether that's public or private sector. And as early as public school, we're not getting out there and talking about what IT can do. And young girls and young boys are thinking that IT's being a programmer who's locked in a sweaty basement for the rest of their lives. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to be doing a little bit of that outreach. And I think we're not only going to address that skills gap with the Generation X and Y, we've got to be thinking about more flexible work arrangements for mid-career folks that might be thinking about a change, or for people that would have been retiring at 60 or 65 before and now want to stay in the workplace in some capacity, because there's a tremendous knowledge that's going to be walking out the door in our industry over the next 5 years as well. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach, and it's incumbent on all of us to start to be thinking about various ways of addressing that.
Also, there's potentially, in IT, we used to segment our domain a lot. We used to create a lot of specialist jobs, and we like to give them full job descriptions with a lot of details, because this is what sometimes our black and white employees like, to have a very detailed job. In order to attract other people coming from other type of training and profile, if you have a chance, look what Gartner is providing as a future profile, as the versatilist. Individual who have more general profile, who has the ability and skills needed to speak with clients. And that's one way probably we could look at, and to augment the workforce within IT. Technology today has evolved a lot, and we no longer have programmers in the basement and all that. So the technology is far more easy to use, and it's having clients working with clients, so same profile will help us, I guess, augment our capacity to deliver.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think we've run out of time for questions. Do we have time, Craig, though, for the polling? No. Try it again. So it's no?
We will do the polling during the transition to the next
session.
Okay. So
Thank
if
you.
you close this session, and then we'll do that. So
perfect.
I turn it back to you, and then.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank all 4 of you ladies That was a terrific session and some really excellent insights. Before we leave the stage, though, I would like to ask Susan, just to talk a little bit about a special project with CIO Canada.
Okay, so what I want to talk about is a little bit what we are doing as an association to help in some of this talent shortage. So one of the things that we've done, and you'll hear tomorrow about some things we've done across the board, but we've been specifically focused on how do we allow more women to succeed in the CIO sector. So what we've done is we've piloted a program with the Ontario chapter leading on e-mentorship. So what we've done is we've gone out with partnership with CATA WIT, which is the Women in IT, to find really talented women who, with some help with mentorship, could really help succeed. And in fact, I'm happy to say one of them, Natalia, is that it? Yeah, she's here in the room. So that's how talented she is. She was invited actually by one of the people to attend. So that's a piece of work we're doing. And the reason why we're doing it is because we found that mentorship, 47% of women said that was the biggest barrier, beyond work-life balance actually, to achieving success in the CIO or in the IT profession, was they perceived that there wasn't enough available mentorship. So thanks to you all volunteering some of your time, we're starting to match up very talented women in Ontario with talented CIO leaders here, and we're going to expand this more nationally as we get our teeth into this more. So if you have any questions, suggestions, want to get involved, you can contact myself or Marianne.
Great. And there's quite a few e-mentors here already, I see. So thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.